Well, the report also suggests that there may be more prosecutions connected to Mueller's investigation. The redacted pages of Index, or actually Appendix D, shows that 2 investigations remain ongoing, and that Mueller issued 12 criminal referrals to other jurisdictions. Those are all in addition to the cases that have already been identified in public reporting. Ken, give us a sense of what the, what's going to be the results of what's coming now with all these referrals.
So many of those, we have no idea what they are, but we do know that the New York Attorney General is looking at the Trump Foundation. We know that the Southern District of New York is still looking at that whole Michael Cohen campaign finance issue where Trump was implicated in a felony. And they're also investigating individuals in the Trump organization. So there are some people close to the president who think that that's a more dangerous investigation criminally if they start rooting around in Trump's finances. And then you have Congress, which is not, Adam Schiff, the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, is not really satisfied that Mueller delved deeply into whether Trump had a financial relationship with Russia going back years. So he's going to do that. He's issuing a subpoena to Deutsche Bank to see about the loans that that bank made to Trump. That's where this is going. These investigations have a long way to go.
Let me go back to Maya, because, what jumped out at me, I skipped it, the reference to one of the redacted names. It could be Roger Stone. I don't know. I guess it is. But the question is, what about this whole thing about who was getting the heads up on WikiLeaks? I mean, we've been covering this story as almost a profession for 2 years. Let's be honest. This has been our occupation. And we've become very familiar with these sequences of events. Like all of a sudden, Roger says you're going to get something really tasty in a couple of days. All of a sudden, it comes out from WikiLeaks. And then they say, well, I was just talking generally. No, you weren't.
No.
Where's that one going?
What happens with Roger Stone, we're going to know, because there's going to be a trial, which means that's going to be public. I think it's really interesting because one of the things that's going on in the Mueller report is there is a section where he's talking about the Trump Tower meeting with Don Jr., Paul Manafort, Jared Kushner, and a Russian an attorney who's close to Putin.
And maybe Ivanka, too.
And maybe Ivanka, too. And this was where, Mueller said, I couldn't show, it didn't have sufficient evidence of willfulness of the campaign violation. But then immediately following the section where he's talking about that, it's blocked out. And on one hand, you have Michael Cohen, the Southern District of New York, has an ongoing investigation related, obviously, to the payments of women through the Trump Organization. And that will also be, I think, the subject of the New York State Attorney General's investigation. But at the same time, this is in the context of a discussion of the Trump Tower meeting, not a discussion of Michael Cohen, not a discussion of the Trump Organization. Maybe that's one of the dozen investigations that we don't know about that still indicates campaign finance crimes being investigated.
Look, there's so much going here. These fingernails are going to keep growing on this body. Thank you so much, Ryan Goodman, Maya Wiley, and Ken Delaney.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.